Hi everyone, it's Lauren and welcome to the latest episode in my series on Shakespeare. Today's video is going to be about Othello. If you would like a more general overview of Shakespeare, I will link my introduction to Shakespeare up here and also in the description box below. I've also already done one of these videos on Romeo and Juliet. If there are any other plays that you would like me to take a closer look of, then please leave your requests in the description box below. Othello is the story of treachery and downfall. Our story centres on Othello, who is a general in Venice and is described as a Moor. Now, although this is commonly taken to mean West African, Moorish actually just means not white. It could mean anyone with dark skin. It could be someone of Arabic heritage, and Othello's race has been interpreted in many different ways throughout the years. Othello is very well thought of in Venice. He's risen to the top of the army through his prowess in battle, and he's often described as noble. However, our play opens just after the secret marriage of Othello to Desdemona, who is the daughter of a local rich family, and this mixed race wedding does cause several issues within the social structure. Her father, in fact, thinks that Desdemona must have been bewitched in order for her to disobey her father and marry the Moor. Othello's real downfall, however, is plotted by his ensign Iago for reasons unknown. We don't know the full extent of Iago's hatred for Othello. We just know that he despises him. He achieves his aims by arousing a jealousy in Othello and tricking him into believing that his wife is having an affair with his lieutenant Michael Cassio. Iago does this by whispering thoughts and images into Othello's ear, but also by stealing Desdemona's handkerchief and leaving it in Cassio's room, which Othello then takes as a sign that Desdemona has given this symbol of her affection to Cassio. And on that very small thing, Othello then goes utterly mad with jealousy and rage and proceeds to murder his wife. Othello is a very interesting protagonist because although we see that he does have very many good and noble qualities, we also see that he is disposed to these weaknesses of rage and jealousy and anger. However, this portrayal is obviously a very rounded portrayal of somebody who is non-white, and Shakespeare does something very interesting with what audiences' expectations would have been at the time if they're depicted with a black character on stage. They probably would have expected that character to end up being evil, whereas really in this play, although he's an anti-hero, Othello is more the victim, more the hero of the piece, and Iago is actually very, very clearly the villain. Iago is a fascinating character. He has more lines in the play than Othello does, and what's very interesting about him is that we never fully understand his motives. We open the play with a conversation between him and his friend Rodrigo. Iago says that he's very unhappy with Othello because he has promoted Cassio to lieutenant when he should have promoted Iago. Rodrigo hates Othello because he wanted to marry Desdemona and Othello has gone and done that before he could. So through this interchange we see Iago acknowledging to Rodrigo that he hates Othello, and he says, "I am not what I am," which means to say that he is not as he appears, and although he appears to serve and be friendly to Othello, that is actually an act and he is planning to destroy him and take his revenge. Although this is the motive that Iago gives to Rodrigo at the beginning of the play, he then never mentions the issue ever again. In fact, even when he manages to get Cassio fired from his position for being drunk, Iago doesn't stop and say, "Okay, fine, I've achieved my aims now." He actually continues to push Othello further down his path to destruction. Similarly, when Iago's wife Emilia finds Desdemona's handkerchief, she says, "My husband has asked me to steal this for a long time and now I'll give it to him," which implies that Iago has been wanting this handkerchief for whatever reason from before Cassio was promoted to lieutenant. So he constantly says, "I hate the Moor." We don't really know why. We don't understand this deep-seated hatred, but we can probably guess that it hasn't just come from this one act of promoting Cassio above him. He also displays an almost psychopathic lack of empathy. When people have to die in order for him to achieve his aims, he's completely fine with that. The fact that he's able to convince everyone around him that he is honest and true, he is constantly referred to as honest Iago, implies that he is able to put on different faces depending on who he's with. And although he professes to mainly hate Othello and I suppose Cassio, he makes no bones about killing Rodrigo when he gets in his way. He doesn't care about the fact that Othello is about to murder Desdemona, and he kills his own wife when she starts spilling the truth about all of his actions to everybody. He doesn't even seem to have empathy or concern for himself, even when he gets caught at the end of the play. He doesn't seem that concerned, and he just tells everyone, "I will speak no more." So even then we don't get his motives as to why he did it. His behaviour is very reminiscent of psychopathic serial killers. There are some really interesting themes that come out of Othello. One of the most obvious ones is jealousy and revenge. Even right at the beginning of the play we see Iago saying that he is jealous of Cassio and he will enact his revenge on Othello. Rodrigo is jealous of Othello, and then of course Othello is driven mad by his jealousy and his need to enact revenge on Cassio and Desdemona due to what Iago's been saying to him. In fact, the only characters that don't seem to portray these traits are Desdemona and Cassio themselves. One of the other themes that the play toys with is the idea of faith, and I don't necessarily mean religious faith here, but more faith in people and faith in what you see as opposed to what you believe. So at the beginning of the play, Othello has a lot of faith for his wife. He knows that she's true, but at the same time, he has a lot of faith in Iago. He trusts what Iago is telling him when he's drip feeding these subtle hints or suspicions that Desdemona is cheating on him. The way that Iago manages to convince Othello is very interesting as well, because it's a mix of Iago telling Othello what he's seen and Othello just trusting that, and then also him showing proof to Othello. But the proofs that he gets are actually very small. So his proof is Iago telling Othello that he's seen Cassio with the handkerchief. Othello doesn't actually see the handkerchief himself. He does, however, question Desdemona for the handkerchief, and he realises that she doesn't have it, and he takes that as absolute proof. Iago also orchestrates a meeting between himself and Cassio, talking to Cassio about Bianca, his whore, making Cassio say these lewd things which Othello believes are about Desdemona. So this is a proof which Othello is seeing, but as the audience we know that Othello is not seeing what he believes he is in fact seeing. So there's an interesting mix of characters believing what they are told rather than what they see, but then also when they do see things, it's believing them to be what they want them to be. And then we also have the audience knowing this. So there's a lot of dramatic irony here where the audience knows a lot that the characters on stage don't, because Iago is telling you his plans. It's also an interesting point that Othello chooses to believe Iago and not Desdemona, who protests her innocence to the end, when it really is a case of one word against the other. Was jealousy always within Othello, and he just needed that little spark of doubt in order for him to act upon it. Another interesting theme to come out of the play is obviously the subject of race, but also race and isolation, because Othello is the only black person in the cast of characters that we have. Interestingly, although there are racial slurs used by Rodrigo and Iago, we don't really see Iago in his personal time, in his soliloquies, hating Othello because of his race specifically. He uses racial slurs to Brabantio in order to incite Brabantio's anger. So we don't really know if Iago's hatred stems from the fact that Othello isn't white. Othello is also displayed as a fully round character, so it's very clear from this play that any prejudices towards Othello aren't necessarily Shakespeare's own prejudices, but he's actually using different prejudices, I've said that word a lot, that stem from all the different characters, so ones that would exist in different people in society, in order to make a comment on it. Because it's very easy to ascribe bad behaviours to people who look differently to you, and for the probably all white audiences of the 16th century, or people who very rarely saw people who weren't white, it would have normally been very easy to make dark-skinned characters bad and evil. And it's a very interesting portrayal in Othello that he's a very fully rounded individual, and it's not as simple as that. Something else I always find interesting is how Othello has been adapted onto the stage. So an adaptation that I would highly recommend is the Kenneth Branagh Laurence Fishburne one from 1995. I always find that there are a lot of interesting / awkward / self-important views that come from actors wanting to play Othello. Very famously, Laurence Olivier blacked up for Othello for a National Theatre production, which I think he won Oscars for. It's a performance that is highly lauded and everybody thought was fantastic. As somebody in the modern day, I find white actors wanting to play Othello a very entitled position, because there's no reason why you can't just not play this one part. I mean, even Michael Gambon sort of blacked up to play it in the 80s, which makes you think, like, Michael, really? Patrick Stewart has played Othello in a production where the rest of the cast were entirely black, so it was more of a comment of him being other, but because he was white, and at least he didn't black up. At the same time, I kind of question whether that play is really necessary. Like, is it necessary for Patrick Stewart to play Othello? Why not just not play him? So it is an interesting question, and because the central subjects of Othello are very much about race, it really makes for some interesting adaptations, whether people try and do it very, very literally so that Othello is black and everybody else is white, or whether you have more of a mixed race cast. I think that's one of the reasons why it's performed so regularly, because there's so many different things that you can do with it, and the themes of kind of race especially, but jealousy and hatred and love and devastation are all themes that are relevant today as well. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I would love to hear more from you if you have any more thoughts on the play, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!